Anonymous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Welcome to United Front Radio. This is Kyle McCarthy, once again filling in for Daniela Wells. She is just getting back from Lincoln, Nebraska, where she was helping Dan Burdorf collect his final petition signatures to be on the ballot as a U.S. Senate candidate. The million-dollar question, did he get on the ballot? We still don't know the answer to that. They got in total about 5,700 signatures out of something like 5,000 needed, but the totals needed for each district were still unclear, and so the petitions have been submitted to the Secretary of State, and we're just kind of waiting. Probably by next week we should have some information about a press conference that Dan did that was attended by the Associated Press and some others, where he was able to get his message out one last time before that decision is made, and fingers crossed, we're hoping he's going to be able to make it into a debate with the other candidates and so forth. So once again, great work by Dan and the other petitioners, especially Joe Johnson, Daniela, Thomas Mars, we had some others out there, Paul Kremers, Ellie Frank, so everyone did a great job, and good luck. Today on the show, my guest is Adam Rodriguez, who is a former and hopefully future congressional candidate in Pennsylvania's 10th District as a Democrat, and we're going to talk about that and just sort of, probably talk politics and economic philosophy and wherever else we want to go. So welcome aboard, Adam.
Well, hi. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And it's always an honor to be involved with the UFAA in any capacity. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So do you want to just give us, maybe we can just start with some background about how you came to run as a Democrat in the 10th District, right, and just go off in whatever direction you want, just sort of reflecting on that.
Well, I initially, running for office for me was never even close to my mind. It was never even something that I would even contemplate really as far back as about 2008, 2009. I started to get involved with a lot of activism, and I was doing a lot of street campaigning, and that's when people started to say to me, "Hey, you really are kind of a natural at this. You should think about running for office." And initially I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. What can I do? But then after a while, I realized that the only way I could somehow really make a difference were to be if I could somehow, gain a little slice of power by actually running for office. And so initially back in 2010, I did run as an independent within the 17th before they redistricted the lines in the 17th district in Pennsylvania, which is where I live in. But I'm running right now in 2016 when I decide to run again, depending on what happens for this current election. I'll be running in the 10th. So, but under, United States constitutional law, you have to reside in the state of the district that you're running in at the time that you take office. That's one of the articles of the Constitution. So, at any rate, right. I decided to run for Congress. Actually, I was going to run for state rep here in Pennsylvania, but I was talking to a good friend of mine and a friend of the UFAA. His name's Darcy Richardson. He's a very astute political historian, very similar to Webster in a lot of ways, but from a different angle. He comes from a very deep understanding of the history of third parties in the United States. And as such, when we talked about running for state rep, or at least some type of elected position right here in Pennsylvania, something reasonable, the first thing he said to me was, Pennsylvania has not had an independent in the Senate or the Assembly of the state legislature since 1934, or somewhere around that kind of like halcyon New Deal period. So, that just goes to show you just how that the hegemonic power of these Wall Street controlled parties, unfortunately.
And now you're in the 10th district or thereabouts,
Northeast,
which is northeastern Pennsylvania. And so, can you give us a little bit of the background, the lay of the land in terms of politics?
Okay, so I'm in the 17th, but Monroe County is half in the 10th district, and again, that's due in large part to the state legislature being Republican controlled. When they gained full control in 2010, they redistricted the entire state to benefit the GOP. So as a result of that, they have this really, the gerrymandering with the 10th is unreal. It's the second largest by area district within the state, and it's one of the largest districts in the entire country, but it's not the largest by far. But comparatively speaking, here in the Northeast, it's a very large district. So it spans from the northeast corner of the state, where it basically meets its axis with Pennsylvania and New York. So that's the Delaware Water Gap, and extends all the way over, nearly halfway across the state into what's known as Tioga County, splits Tioga County, or part of Tioga County is in the 10th, and then goes all the way down south along the Appalachian and then into the Adirondack mountain range, down around near what's known as Mifflintown and Mifflinburg and Mifflin County, which is in the southernmost reaches of the district. And then back up around Scranton. They went around all the Democratic strongholds when it came to the redistricting. Right. Around Scranton, around parts of Carbon County, and Carbon, which is a pretty heavily populated city, small city, and then down through parts of Stroudsburg, which is right near me. So it splits Stroudsburg. And so I'm basically about a mile away, or less than a mile away, from the border of the 10th district. So it's a very large district by area, and it's extremely rural in most parts. This is the old mining, agro-industry area of Pennsylvania. It still is a pretty large. Pennsylvania is 7th in the country in terms of agriculture, but people don't really realize that. It's by area. It's not nearly as big as parts of like Kansas or Nebraska with my friend Dan out there, but we are 7th in the country in regards to overall agricultural production. So, so big mining history, obviously in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area, up on through Carbon County. This is all anthracite, and further west, bituminous coal regions. So. There's a long tradition of labor organization and labor struggle within some of the most historic labor struggles took place right in that district.
And as I recall, now fracking has become one of the big industries and also kind of a political football.
Huge. That's thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for reminding me, because there's so much going on in regards to me running. I tend to forget this major issue, and this is really a disaster because it's not only a backwards technology, unfortunately, but beyond that, it's really just one more example of the really horrendous primitive accumulation that's taking place as a result of this, wild, speculative financial oligarchy that's, kind of like wrapped its octopus arms around the United States and most of the globe. So these gas corporations have come in. Pennsylvania is one of only, I think, 32 or 33 states in the Union that does not have any severance tax in regards to the extraction that's going on. So they pay no extraction fee. There is an impact fee when they do a new well, which is, I think, $50,000 per drill head. There's a name for it when they do a new drill. And so, just massive amounts of water are being used in when they flush the gas out, all the backwash that comes out 75% or maybe a little bit more of that actually comes back out, and that's got to be taken, and it's supposed to be brought to processing plants. They're already overburdened with processing regular sewage. Now they're coming in with all this excess amount of water, and they're wondering where it's going. Well, a lot of it's being dumped, and if it's not being dumped, they're going out to parts of Ohio and other parts of other states, shipping the water all the way out there, and pressurizing it back down into the ground at a mile or 2 miles down. And that's one of the reasons why people are seeing these earthquakes in different parts of the country, is because the seismic reactions to this massive amounts of water that's going, precious water. You're hearing about water being, water shortages in other parts of the country, yet they're carrying water across state borders so they can just, with some of this somewhat poisonous material in it, okay, and they're just pumping it back down into the ground, and it's really it's a disaster. It really is a disaster.
And it's depleting. And what is the name of the big aquifer that's up there in the north of Pennsylvania?
Well, in terms of the Marcellus Shale region, is this? It's the Marcellus Shale, which is about a mile below the surface of the it's a mile below the earth, right? Then about 2 miles below that is what they really want to get at, which is the Utica Shale. And the Utica Shale, and this is all because of this newer technology that Halliburton basically patented. I don't think they actually developed it. They might have, but I know they patented it, and as a result of this horizontal drilling technique, which basically exploits a mile down and a mile out with the Marcellus Shale, which is liquefied natural gas. Now for the Utica Shale, which is what they really want to get to because of the land rights that they have, the mineral rights, they can go down even further, and they can extract the Utica Shale, which is mostly just straight oil once they're done with it. So, that's why one of the reasons why you're hearing, the United States is going to be quote-unquote energy independent for the next 100 years, and a lot of the plans that were originally laid out by, I don't want to get too far off base here, but this is one of the plans that's been factored into this Asian pivot. They no longer need, as much as they thought, the oil and gas reserves that were, in this Ukraine, or rather, Tajikistan and this Ark of Crisis area. Right. So now they're having to, basically rejigger their entire geopolitical structure and aiming it more towards China as the real threat, economically speaking.
Right.
But it really is just, again, it's a looting process. They're taking advantage of the natural resources under the ground of the people that happen to live on that property. They're destroying the water table, and like I said, it's a backwards technology, and really, the people.
It sort of does put, yourself as like a New Deal Democrat. It puts you in a slightly uncomfortable situation where you want to encourage industry and you want to encourage energy development, but at the same time, it's just kind of, that's the choice you're given. Whereas there are better choices out there. Why are we doing this when we could be pursuing new forms of nuclear power?
It. So to that, actually, thank you for mentioning and bringing that up. That made me want to say one of my platform issues when I was running. Unfortunately, didn't get on the ballot, but it was a learning experience. But it could have happened. But regardless, one of my kind of when I went down to the Democratic Committee headquarters. And I said, I want to run for office. They were really excited, and they said, "Yeah, well, what about this? We have an uncontested, at this point, an uncontested congressional seat in the 10th, which was about mid-January, early January." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, sure, I don't have much money." And they were like, "Well, don't worry about it. We'll give you some support." So they did, and one of the things that they did make as a conditionality was that I come out for a moratorium on fracking. And the reason for that is Monroe County, which is, again, one of the 3 central counties that's in this northeast PA area. They call it NEPA. Actually, as far as the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus is called, it's basically the Northeast Caucus, which is 15 counties in the Northeast PA. So we happen to be right near the Delaware River watershed area, where we had to come up with, thankfully the Democrats here were able to muster up a moratorium in the Delaware River water basin that could be challenged by the different federal environmental organizations, and that could end. So, that's a big fight, because if these frackers were to get into those areas, because the Marcellus Shale region really goes through parts of northeast PA, it's centered right in what's basically Bradford County, which is right south of what they call that northern tier and of Pennsylvania, the southern tier. It's that long parallel line that goes across the state between New York and Pennsylvania. So right south of that is the very dead center heart of most of the gas extraction is taking place, and the prime gas extraction is taking place right there. Actually, I'm forgetting the name of the town, but it's in a lot of the books and material that you would read if you were to do any research into this. So at any rate, they came up with a moratorium within those three counties that are right next to the Delaware River water basin, because, of course, New York State already has a moratorium on fracking, which is still pending. And were that to be lifted, first of all, you would see a lot of farmers in that area that are going to make a bundle, because they've now negotiated very, very high land rights or mineral rights. That's one. But, again, it's a backwards technology, and, we have much more efficient forms of energy production in regards to, coming online fusion within the next decade or so, commercially available, hopefully. And then before that, you have thorium, which is a safe, non-radioactive process in terms of very high-density energy production, and then nuclear. So, those are, I'm for a quote-unquote all of the above strategy with a main focus on high-density energy production using those main methods and technologies up front. So, to look and see what's happening with this Marcellus shale extraction process, it's just a total disaster, because this is all as a result of the, wild environmentalism, radical environmentalism, quote unquote, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, where all the entire, what they call Atoms for Peace program under the New Deal period, that was all just brushed aside in favor of now wind and solar, and as a result of that, you see this interest in carbon extraction through the liquefied natural gas. So
right. So, maybe let's talk about. So you I guess, had the opportunity to run as an independent or on the Tax Wall Street Party or something, but talk about your experience dealing with the Democratic Party, maybe even on these issues like environmental issues where they sort of have an entrenched party line, and you can't say exactly how you want to say.
Okay, so really quick, the reason I brought up the moratorium issue is, they put that imposition on me, which it was at the time, and really, quite honestly, I still want the moratorium, But going forward, I'm contemplating coming out for a ban on any new drills, any new wellheads being drilled, and obviously, at least a 5.5% severance tax on the gas extraction, which, along with the Wall Street sales tax, would go a long way to cover any of the budget shortfalls, which are still happening within the state. So, but okay, so you were asking why I decided to run as a Democrat, right?
Right, where presumably you were sort of fighting against, the perceived self-interest of all the Republican voters in the county, and I guess, just for the people out there listening who we've talked about Dan's campaign for the Tax Wall Street Party, where the good part of that is you can say exactly what you want to say. The bad part is you don't get taken as seriously. You don't have the access.
Gotcha. Well, okay, so obviously with the Democratic Party, one of the things I've realized is there's money at the top, at the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. That's the one that's run by Steve Israel. He's the money man for that operation. So if they feel as though you're worthy, once you're in office, and they feel as though you're going to put up the fight against someone like a Marino, which is, I'll tell you some interesting things later about that. Tom Marino, he's the current Republican that's in office. If they feel that you will, they'll put the money in. But at the very base level, they're really the only money they're ever able to fundraise outside of candidacies, outside of people fundraising on their own for their candidacies. There's really not a lot. So it's not like you're looking at the Democratic Committee having like a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 kitty. I mean, it could be. That could happen, but right now, no, it's not. Most of the people that are involved with the party, I'm not saying they don't have jobs, and they're all working, most of them, and they're just regular, average, hardworking people. But the big thing for me, running as a Democrat as opposed to a Republican, was I felt like I had a lot more in common with the Democrats than I did with the Republicans, because, the Republicans are coming from this kind of like libertarian budget cutting. I mean, obviously the Tea Party informs much of their rhetoric. And I really wanted no part of that, considering what I know about, the banking industry, what I know about the American system, as we call it, and popularized by Lincoln, this idea of utilizing a national bank to be able to pay for almost anything, really.
Right. It's like the Democrats are only 50 years from JFK, and the Republicans are 150 years from Lincoln.
That's exactly it. And as such, their tendency to advocate for the most disparate element within their own party, or the most impoverished people within their own party, whether they be minorities or blacks or indigent or people that have lived in Pennsylvania forever, very working poor, the way that they fight for them is how I want to fight, because I don't want to have to fight from the standpoint of, oh yeah, well, as a Republican, I'm going to do what I can to make sure that you have all the means necessary under the American system and having a national bank. But in the interim, if you happen to be pushed over the edge because we're cutting Social Security, because we're cutting, the food stamp program, we're cutting SNAP, we're cutting this program, I don't want to be associated with that. Okay, to me, every single human being has, it's my responsibility, I feel, my civic duty, to make sure that every single human being has the opportunity and is taken care of, so they can live for the day when they can, if they haven't contributed to society already, that they will be able to contribute in some way, And that could be in the most minor familial way between, family members, giving them inspiration, or maybe someone running to decide they want to run for office, or working in an industrious capacity in manufacturing, which is not much to say these days.
Right.
But I think you understand my point, So I felt a real strong commonality, and obviously the FDR and Kennedy aspect is huge for me.
I was surprised to hear when your campaign was going on this past year, just how, I don't want to say disorganized, but the Democratic Party stays on the ballot just through being grandfathered in for decades and decades. They don't really have to do a whole lot to continue to exist, and it was surprising to me, number one, how receptive the people in that area, the Democrats in that area, were to your ideas and your strategy. It seemed like they were not in any way corrupt or controlled
right,
from the top.
That's true. That's true. That's definitely true. Yeah.
It seemed like there was just kind of an open door for someone like yourself if you had the money and the resources to get on the ballot and to be able to advertise and all these kinds of things. People can get into these mainstream parties. Maybe not in, you wouldn't be able to infiltrate the Democratic Party in Chicago or maybe in New York City or something like that. But in an area like this, that's maybe a little bit of a red state or a 50-50 kind of.
Yeah, well, Pennsylvania is by about almost a 3-2 margin Democrat. But just to show you how insidious this, Koch operation, Citizens United, Americans for Prosperity, all these bogus, kind of operations are really just counterinsurgency operations, counterintelligence operations to basically, undermine the Republican base and some of the Democrats and get them to go for these policies, which would basically slit their own throats. It really is a tragedy. But the Koch brothers have seeded so much money at right down to the school board level, all right, that they have hegemonic control within the state itself, and it's really a tragedy because this not too long ago was a heavily Democratic state. Now it's a little bit different, and I think with Corbett hopefully getting run out of office, and then Wolf will be put in, you're going to see a chance for at least the governorship and maybe the assembly to turn Democrat. But at any rate, to your point, I think one of the reasons why the Democrats were receptive, and by the way, in regards to money, if I had even a modicum of money to be able to run in the 10th, just maybe really 100 to 150,000 is what I've just. That's not a lot because I'm talking about Marino is going to have at least $2 to $2.5 million easy when he runs, okay, and that's going to come in from the GOP. But for me, if I can get my message across, if I know that I had that, in other words, come 2014, right after the election, assuming that the Democrat that's running now doesn't get elected, I wish him the best of luck. Assuming that doesn't happen, I make this into a full-time deal, a full-time operation for me, where I'm going to every county, talking to every county committee, getting my message out, not taking no for an answer, not backing down on a lot of these smaller issues as far as the Wall Street sales tax. That's a no-brainer for me. If they want to give me pushback on it, well, that's up to you. I'll take it to the public. But my point being is that if I just had a little bit of money, I would know how to be able to infiltrate that district and turn it Democrat. Tell me, I could do that.
Right.
I know I could do that because my message would appeal not only to Democrats in terms of the social aspect, helping those that are impoverished, but also to a lot of Republicans who basically shill for the rich. So you want to do that? Okay, fine, no problem. But how much are you really making? Oh, you're making $70,000. You're making $50,000, $40,000, and you consider yourself rich? Look, come on, you're just like the rest of us. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Anything below a certain amount of dollars, you're going to be tax exempt. I haven't figured it out yet, but you're going to be tax exempt. We're going to make sure that those people that have, basically through this, again, through primitive accumulation, we're going to make sure that they pay their fair share of taxes, whether it's through a Wall Street sales tax or a much more progressive tax structure, federally speaking. We're going to make sure that they pay their taxes. So, that appeals to them. And that appeals to the Democrats too, obviously. So, it's just, you have to kind of somehow tell these Republicans that are, and this is the 10th is majority Republican district. I mean, we're talking heavy Tea Party faction. Tom Marino gets most of his support from the Tea Party. Would be more than happy to engage these people in a very spirited debate over their beliefs and what it is and who they think that they're actually what interest they think they're protecting. If they think they're protecting their own interests, they're not.
Hey, Adam, we're coming up on a break, so we're going to take that, and we will be right back. Okay, we're back. This is United Front Radio on UCY.TV, and this is Kyle McCarthy. We're talking with Adam Rodriguez. He was just talking about running as a Democrat in Pennsylvania's 10th District, which is kind of a rural, somewhat Republican area. Adam, you talked about, having $150,000, you could win that seat. And that sounds like a lot of money to some people, but when you consider... we covered this race of David Bratt, who defeated Eric Cantor in Virginia, and I think that was like Cantor had maybe $4 million or something, and Dave Bratt had I think $200,000 or $250,000, and that was seen as just utterly remarkable by people. They couldn't believe someone with so little money, and and Bratt looks like a bought and paid for candidate of these Republican networks. But I think what you're talking about is, yes, reaching the voters, but really just doing that sort of ugly grassroots work of basically providing that direct leadership to the party and to people in the community.
That's exactly what it is. And, I just it made me think of something. I was speaking to Darcy the other night. He mentioned to me there was a governor out of Florida back in the 1980s. He was very well loved. I'm trying to remember his name, but it doesn't matter. He initially ran on his first campaign. He walked the entire state of Florida, town to town.
Wow!
Walked, and when he told me, and he won. And I'm trying to remember his name, but he was very well loved as a Democrat. And he it got me thinking, damn it, if I could just get settled enough where I could do something like that. In other words, if I saw that I was getting enough campaign funds, to be able to subsist upon. Because people have to remember, under the current campaign finance law, you can actually take in your funds, and in your first year, your first run for office, okay, the first year of that run, as long as you don't exceed the amount of your gross income in the previous year, you can live off of the money that you take in. Okay? Now that's law. That's federal law, all right? Under the mostly Republican-controlled Federal Election Committee. So if anything, God bless them for that, all right?
Well, yeah, and thank God for that law, because otherwise only the super rich and people without jobs are going to... That's exactly
it. So if you want to run for state office, actually in the state of Pennsylvania, it's different. In the state of Pennsylvania, you can take in unlimited amounts of money. What we were talking about before was at the federal level, Congress and Senate. But now, at the state level, they can take in unlimited amounts of campaign funds. All right? So... from any donor. In other words, there's no $2,600, limit, right? So, but anyways, I'll digress. With that, one of the things I want to do, I was thinking, why don't I just start walking the 10th? I'll walk the entire 10th district, be like Johnny Appleseed. I'll go throughout the entire district. I'll go out with a big walking tall stick over my shoulder, saying, "Tom Marino, where are you? Come out!"
Yeah.
So really quick, I don't know if you heard about it in the news. Two things with Marino. First of all, 2 weeks ago, one of his staffers, I think because you got to remember, this guy is top to bottom, hooked up, has connections to him.
He worked. Where did he work for Raytheon or something like that? I thought he had, or that was another guy who was a former congressman.
No, that's not him. The ex-congressman that was in the 10th as a Blue Dog Democrat currently works for BAE. He works for the Department of Homeland Security, and he's a consultant to BAE. So but he's former military. All right. So at any rate, with Marino, his press secretary, all right, chief of staff for the press, all right, walks into one of the not the Rayburn building. There's another congressional building that he's housed in, right? Well, once I take his seat, that'll be my office. But at any rate, they don't know the name. But he walks into the building with a loaded firearm. Yeah. And not only that, a loaded firearm, unregistered loaded firearm, right? And I'm like, good Lord. I mean, I know that most of your constituency are fanatic Second Amendment rights, advocates, but do you really have to live the life? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. It sounds like that guy over at the Heritage Foundation or something, where a guy had literally an armed hostage situation to take control of the.
What's his name? Dick's Army. He walks in with a guy from the District of Columbia Police, and the guy's got a loaded sidearm, and he's facing down Mutton Chop's guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Kicking people out of their desks at the barrel of a gun.
So at any rate, the other thing was, just the other day, in regards to this immigration issue, which is really sad enough as it is, but again, more distractions from the real issue. In regards to the banking and what's going on in global situation, so she walks. Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, Minority Leader, runs straight up to Marino, who's in the well of Congress. He wasn't scheduled to speak, so he gets up and speaks and starts firing back at the Democrats because he's a demagogue. And right away, Pelosi runs right up to him, gets right up into his face, and starts pointing a finger at him. Okay, and for me, this is great because now, obviously, I mean, look, Matt Cartwright is the 17th District Democrat, very progressive, great guy. I like him a lot. I've met him, spoken to him a couple times. Hopefully, if I can get into the 10th again, I think he'll definitely give me some support. I went to his recent July 4th cookout. He spoke, and I said hello to him again. He said, "Hey, how's it going? I'm sorry I didn't make the ballot. Great, whatever." So, but at any rate, see, Matt's Pelosi's favorites. Matt's considered to be one of the most quote-unquote progressive Democrats within the progressive caucus. So he's got a bright future right now, especially under Pelosi's kind of wing. So, but that's cheek to jowl to the 10th, 17th district. So now that Marino's on her radar and her being very close to Steve Israel, I'm hoping that if I can go in there and just, go bare knuckle with this guy, which would be fantastic. Just lay a few clean ones just right on him, and then the press will maybe give me a little bit of coverage. They might be able to take notice of what I'm doing in there and come across with some dough from the DCCC. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm hoping. All right, but short of that, look, I got friends in the 10th. There's people within the district that I've met, other Democrats that were really excited about my initial candidacy, and when I didn't make the ballot, it was like the Titanic. It just went down. And they were very upset, as well as I was, and immediately they were like, "Okay, well, what can we do to help you to get in for the next election? Because we love you, we think you're great." And I was like, "Well, I think I'm great too, but that's besides the point." But my wife doesn't think so. But at any rate, they were thinking of ways that I can get my message out, and they basically opened each and every one of their different districts. Basically said, "Hey, if you want to write anything you want to write, we'll put on our blog, and it's open. You can." So this is an opportunity for me to go in there and get out our message along the lines of the American system through the 10th. Yeah. And like I said, I'm not even in 20. Once the election's over, this next election, all bets are off, assuming that, again, the Democrat doesn't win. They'll give me whatever support they need, because for a Democrat to run in that district, it's a long shot. This district, going all the way back to the Civil War, there have been very intermittent periods where there's been anyone that's been a progressive, taking party shift in consideration, mostly held by Democrats all throughout, what they would consider copperheads during the post-war, pre-war, and then after that, the post-war period, a lot of Democrats, very reactionary, then turning Republican after the 1910s, 1920s, turning Republicans, when the Republicans started to become the party of the wealthy, really, and the Democratic Party shifting more towards the Roosevelt line, the New Deal line. So there has been some very quote-unquote moderate New Deal Republicans. There was one that was in the office in the 10th. This is before redistricting. Now since they've gerrymandered the district, the lines are a little bit different. But by and large, the one guy that was in there for about 25 years as a Republican in the Scranton area, which was part of the 10th initially, he was very progressive, a good friend of labor.
So, we've got like a little less than 20 minutes left. Maybe let's talk about what you mean by progressive, what you mean by the American system, and just from that perspective of being in sort of a rural, working class, Republican leading district. Sort of what is your message to people out there, where you're trying to convince them, what their own heritage is, what their own best interest is?
Look, when you look at the American system, and what we know, our involvement with the UFAA, what we know of the American system through Lincoln, Henry Carey, the Warhawks coming out of the War of 1812, Clay, and John Quincy Adams too. This is the best tradition that we know within our political heritage of the United States. Right, this is what this comes out of. It's based on the idea of optimism, really, because if you look at what it would do, the idea of a national bank, what that would do, minus the opprobrium of the libertarians coming out and saying, oh, well, the national bank is going to be co-opted by a bunch of, corrupt politicians. Well, again, I'm addressing your pessimism. So I think, the thing that I really wanted to...
I was just quickly going to say, you could look right back to that period in the 1830s where there's a fight between Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams over this issue of the national bank as sort of a macrocosm of this fight between optimism and pessimism as represented.
Oh, no, I completely agree. The crucible of the problem that we face now, today, in modern times, from an analogous standpoint, is exactly the same as what happened during that period. And if you think about it, we haven't had explicitly this idea of a national bank until now, which we're going to do. You see, now This represents a quantum leap over the past 150 some odd years of Americans basically wandering in the desert, save for the the period of right after the Civil War, with the potential Reconstruction, the Republican Party, basically suffering under the opprobrium of the Gilded Age and all the people involved with Wall Street and the rise of the J.P. Morgan and all these banks, and then during the New Deal period, only 2 short periods. Okay, so the mantle of creating this national bank is on us to do. This generation, the millennials, those people that would be considered, Xers, or maybe even some boomers that are out there. Fine, whatever. But the opprobrium to do that, the responsibility is on us to do that. So, again, it can only be addressed by the most optimistic outlook. And, this idea of pessimism is really rooted in from an imperial standpoint. It's rooted in the oligarchy, and it's specifically designed as an outlook to not allow our population under our Constitution to be able to progress forward in very powerful ways. And one of the aspects besides the existentialist outlook, which is really what informs this pessimistic standpoint. Oh, in other words, when I say pessimism, it's people are always going to be greedy. Money's always going to run Congress. Really? Oh, okay. Well, what do you, from what historical standpoint do you prove to me in the history of the United States where that theory is 100% infallibly true. And quite frankly, most of them don't even know the history of the United States, so they can't even inform it from that standpoint. But just they know it's a fraud when they say that to themselves. They understand it as being a fraud, but they only want to mouth what other people have to say. Okay? Because when they look around, they're going, is someone else hearing me say that? No. It's only me and you, pal. So, again, explain to me why it is you think, all right? Explain to me why it is you're so pessimistic. And when you really get down to the nub of it from a scientific standpoint, an oligarchy will always, an imperial oligarchy, meaning what's left of the British Empire through their creation of Wall Street, all right? From a scientific standpoint, what they use is this idea of entropy, which was a scientific formulation by Clausius.
The second law of thermodynamics.
Okay? The second law of thermodynamics is, first of all, it's the conservation of energy is the first law. All right. First of all, the idea of a law when it comes to fundamental principles of the universe is confusing to me. But secondly, the idea of the second law of thermodynamics is that the dissipation of energy is unavoidable. Okay.
So basically, like from a log to a burned log, you're basically getting lower orders of organization, and you're losing the
exactly.
You're
losing the organizational structure of what it took to create that heat, right? Because it's all all these studies were done based upon heat theory and in regards to steam engines. Okay, so first of all, it was Lord Kelvin, of Lars. Right. And it's Thomson. I think it was his original given name was Thomson. So when you do something good for the oligarchy, they give you a given name. They give you a title, right? So Lord Kelvin, when you're out in space, you measure your temperature, if it's really cold in Kelvin, right? So he did these tests. Well, actually, it was Clausius, but Kelvin wrote a book on it initially, and then Clausius did a lot of tests. And the main gist of the test was that when you took, say, for instance, you had a heated rod, piece of steel, and then you submerged it into water, was at room temperature. Eventually, depending on how big that expanse of water was, that eventually you would have an equilibrium between the heated rod, which represents a higher state or an advanced state of organization, and then it dissipating to a room temperature, which would be a lower state of organization. Okay, so the problem with that is that taken within the stricture or the realm of that closed system, all right? In other words, doing a study into the effects of heat in relation to steam engines, that's fine. But what they did was they took that concept of a higher state going to a lower state, okay, and they said that is a principle that exists throughout the universe, okay? And it's a falsehood, because in reality, when you looked at what they did, when it goes from a higher state to what they consider to be a lower state, there's actually more organization within the lower states than there were before. That's one. That's number one. Now, this was challenged as a scientific theory by Planck, and he had proven it in what was known as his black body radiation test. So what they said was that at some point, during getting back to this idea of the dissipation of energy, at some point there would be an equilibrium, right? And at that one moment, at that moment there would be the most amount of chaos. This is crazy and insane, but this is what they believe. So that's how they get this idea of little balls bouncing off of each other that make up the atomic structure of the universe, okay? Which is totally random, okay? So this is from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, it's antithetical to the idea that man is made from, descended from God, that man is made in the image of God, and that he can come into the universe and organize the universe according to his vision. Okay? Now, this idea of complete randomness is what informs the derivatives, because through quantum theory, because this theory was disproved by Planck initially through his black box radiation. I'll explain that in a minute. But then also Einstein came in on that and said that, yeah, this is totally ridiculous. I can't understand why you keep on saying that at that one moment, that when you have this point of complete equilibrium, that represents the most amount of complete arbitrariness, of complete chaos. This idea of chaos theory, it all evolves out of this.
Right. And isn't it funny that George Soros who's got quantum partners?
Yeah, right.
You see these these names coming up, and I mean quantum mechanics
exactly.
basically the idea being you can't simultaneously know the position and the direction of a particle.
That's exactly
at any moment.
And the reason for that is because if you can organize your society from an imperial standpoint around this idea of existentialism, you can't know these things, you can't structure, you can't order the universe. Why even bother doing that? You can't change City Hall, okay? All right? That nonsense. Right? It's been that way, and it's always been that way. Yeah, well, you say that. I don't believe that. See, that's why you're a dinosaur and you're on your way out, and this newer generation that has a little bit more optimism is on their way in. So, bye-bye. So, at any rate, the quantum theory, this idea of quanta, which was light particle, okay, which, well, again, was disproved and the way they disproved it was through a very scientific, very meticulously ordered and structured lab environment. They made this black box, which was completely sealed off with insulation, and they would put, say, cobalt, or they would put iron inside of it, or whatever mineral that they would want to burn off. And they put a little hole on the one end, and they would heat it up so that and get it so they could get to this point of equilibrium. And they would maintain the heat at a constant heat for an extended period of time. And what they did was when they put the little hole inside of it, light was coming out from the box. So theoretically speaking, this period of this total chaos should express itself through light, which was coming out of the hole. But you know what? When they put a prism through the light, the prism reflects in a very ordered way a spectrum of light. And depending upon the energy source that they're using, whether it's red, meaning iron, blue, meaning cobalt, yellow, meaning, I think, uranium, phosphates, right? They come out of the black box in an ordered way. See what I'm saying?
Right.
In a very kind of like U fashion, in terms of it's you're going from cooler to lighter, right? They disproved that. And it was at the Solvay conferences when they ganged up on Einstein in the late 1929, right before the war, all right, between the world wars, when they finally, basically, they just ganged up and they just, beat down on him. All these stupid quantum, actually we would call them positivists, basically existentialists, and on Einstein. And, he refused to give in, and he refused to give in to the end of his life on this. And he even said to one of his friends, I forget, he's his good friend, he wrote a letter, he says, till this day I still don't understand this idea of quantum mechanics. I have no idea what they're even talking about. He couldn't perceive it in that way. And from an imperial standpoint, the only way, if you have an empire and the queen or the king designates within the empire a sir or a knight, okay, technically speaking, they're all equal within that oligarchical system, like the Venetian, Council of 2000, right? Same concept, right? The only way you can gain power over your potential, your rival, okay, is through either gambling or war. Okay, so if you devise a system where we think you've proven that through this randomness that you can somehow, figure out a way to play the market, or if you're going to sit there and count cards, or if you're going to throw dice, well, probability says that at some point you're going to be able to win, right? So that's why they had to enforce this false belief in the idea of an equilibrium. And that's what oligarchical societies have tried to enforce since the beginning of known history. That's what they've always tried to enforce. And it's fun.
And this is some pretty deep stuff you're getting into, but can sort of unpack this for the person on the street, like back to this idea of pessimism. Right. What is the implication of a pessimistic or like a libertarian outlook basically, it sort of like Andrew Jackson said with the bank, he had to destroy the Second National Bank because there was going to be corruption. Sure. And John Quincy Adams published this scathing letter in the Congressional Record that was something to the effect of, Jackson and Roger Taney had taken away the Second National Bank from where it was beneficial to the people and restored it to the bank of whatever, where it was going to be beneficial to their corporate benefactors.
That's a good ending point here for this, because you see, it's the very fact that Jackson would say, well, we're going to end it because we know people are going to be corrupt. We know that politicians are corrupt. No. The only reason that these politicians are corrupt is because they're being corrupted by the empire, meaning Wall Street, okay, or Southern plantation holders. With this, again, they're informed by the idea of empire. They're informed by the idea of, an oligarchical slave culture. All right. So, if you can get the population to believe that, oh yeah, people are always going to be corrupt, well then you've lost. Well, from an oligarchical from Jackson's standpoint, yeah, you've won, but in reality, you're going to lose. You're going to lose, as evidenced by the Civil War. Okay, because the fundamental principle of the universe is that all men are created equal. Okay, and Lincoln had to prove that by defeating the Southern oligarchy and defeating Wall Street, too, at the same time, and also possibly could have teamed up with the Russians to whoop the British, which he should have done. But unfortunately, these questions are being set aside for another day. So that's my answer to that. There's no reason to have this pessimism, because just because you're being told that man is a worm, you have to say, yeah, well, we're worms, and so as such, we're going to treat each other like animals, and we're just going to basically just, each, all for one, or rather for, each for his own,
Well, and one interesting aspect of going back to quantum mechanics is the idea that the outcome of the experiment is affected by the observation itself.
Yeah.
And kind of in the same way, if you act as if the universe is hopeless and do nothing, then there really is going to be entropy.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Whereas when you insert yourself in terms of being, a rational actor into the situation, you change the parameters of the whole thing.
No question about it. But with the idea of entropy, it's analogous to the religious conception that man at the center of the universe represents the most amount of change. So that when you die, you go to heaven, which is at the exterior, the perimeter of the universe. Okay, it's always up and out. Okay, relatively speaking, and that's where there's the least amount of change. So if you're an oligarch, wouldn't that be good if you could somehow convince the people that it's better off that they die? Because you have no purpose here on the planet other than to serve my needs and to serve me. So better off you die quickly so we can get rid of you, because there's too many of you.
Adam, that's all the time we have.